District, and we're here for our monthly parent ed webinar. And this time we have the amazing people from Rainbow Community Center. We had parents that really reached out and asked about how to have different conversations with their students as they're trying to navigate, their gender identity, their sexual orientation. And Rainbow said, we can support y'all with that. And so I'm going to pass this on to Miss Laura Cartwright and Jesse, who will lead us over the next hour. You're able to ask questions in the Q&A. You can, if you need to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand and we'll be responding to a lot of the Q&A in real time, or we also will have time at the end. All right, so I'll pass it on to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Lene. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. I wanted to just quickly introduce myself first before we get involved into the content of our evening, and then I'll share my screen in a moment. My name is Laura Cartwright. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as queer. I am the Director of Education at Rainbow Community Center. And what that means is I work with community districts, schools, businesses, students, on working on best practices for serving our LGBTQ youth. So I do a lot of trainings and I do a lot of content building. I also oversee the youth program at Rainbow Community Center. We'll tell you a little bit about what we got going on over there at the end, so you can get your young people involved. It's amazing. And just a little history. My background is in education. I was a teacher for 10 years. I wrote and co-facilitated a social emotional learning program with our school counselor, and I was an athletic director. I've spent about 25 years doing youth work in various settings. And I left teaching very specifically because I wanted to make sure that I could be a resource to more people with LGBTQ allyship. Every year, my students were experiencing more and more harm and mental health struggles, and I wanted to make sure that there was more than just me in the school as an ally, that I could really work with others how to support our LGBTQ young people. So that's why I'm here and why I do the work. I'm going to pass it over to my co-facilitator tonight, Jessie, to introduce herself and share a little bit about her work she does in the world and why she is here tonight.
Thank you so much, Laura. And hello, everyone. My name is Jessie. I use she and her pronouns. Just a little, I guess like a heads up. I'm recovering from a cold, so I'll be drinking a lot of tea during our call. So I appreciate y'all bearing with me. But my name's Jessie. I am a very proud transgender woman. I am Chicana, which means that I am from Mexican descent. I have been involved with Rainbow for going on 3 years now, I believe, which is crazy to think about because it feels like it was just yesterday. I'm a contract trainer with them, but I was doing my MSW internship with them before. I recently graduated from UC Berkeley with my Master's of Public Health and Master's of Social Welfare degree, and I'm currently in a PhD program at the University of Washington studying public health, more specifically health policy. My work is really interested in thinking about how anti-trans legislation affects the mental health of trans people of color, specifically trans youth. And a lot of my work before being in this PhD program has been involved in working with youth through different forms of empowerment. I had the privilege of being able to provide therapy for trans youth of color in the Bay Area when I was at Berkeley, and that was a very rewarding experience just from my own, I guess, connections with mental health growing up, especially as a trans person of color, and being able to give that back to individuals is really rewarding. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it. Actually, I think, Laura, you're going to share the slides now, right? Okay.
Yeah. And it's going to take me a second to get it up here the way I want it. Awesome. All right. So so tonight we're talking about family allyship and beyond the binary, and how to really have conversations with your young people about gender and gender identity. So we're excited to share with you a little bit about our journeys and also some content that you can hopefully come back to. We are going to start by asking y'all a little bit about you. So Lene, if you could go ahead and launch our first poll. I think we'll go ahead and see. So we have a couple questions for you. Jesse, do you want to read those out for us?
Yes, I can. So
Questions?
the first,
Okay.
first question is, what school does your child attend? Second question is, what is the grade of your child? And then the third question is, how familiar are you with the Rainbow Community Center? So if you could take a second to fill that out for us, it'd be greatly appreciated.
And if for some reason you have trouble in a poll, you can also just put it in the Q&A and we'll see it. And that will help us gauge how to be responsive to you today. Awesome. So it looks like we have a really good mix of representation from the Acalanes Union School District, which is awesome. And we also have a mix of age here, so that's pretty great. I see kind of a mix going on. And then we also have, not surprisingly, a mix, some people very familiar with Rainbow, somewhat familiar or not familiar at all. So I do want to take just a moment to share with you a couple things about Rainbow Community Center. We won't spend a lot of time here, but Rainbow is this really amazing resource in our county. We are the only LGBTQ-centered organization in all of Contra Costa County, and we work really hard to provide a myriad of services. And you can see on the screen, our mission is to serve LGBTQ IA plus people and our allies. But I think what's really important to know about Rainbow is that we are really working towards healing centered engagement and liberation. And we have a focus around celebrating gender and sexual diversity and racial justice. And so we rely heavily on our values around authenticity, bravery, education, healing, and liberation. We work really hard to make sure we're serving our most marginalized in community and having programs that are really reaching all aspects of our county and beyond. So you'll see things happening at Rainbow, like we have a houseless program that serves young people 12 to 24 who are experiencing homelessness. We also have a training program, which I mentioned that I'm part of, where we go out and we do outreach in the area. We do it, actually, we've been international and national with our trainings where we're spreading education. We also have a really robust therapy and clinical department that is offering therapy, family therapy. We have a youth program and a Kind Hearts food pantry. So we get people food in the area. We also have an HIV prevention program that's super robust and is doing a lot of work in the community. So we're just really, we're here for you. And I think what's really important to know is that Rainbow is a resource for so many people. And if you're not sure who to go to around a topic that involves LGBTQ community, you can always reach out to me or anybody at Rainbow and get some feedback and support. And I wanted to just kind of share a highlight of what I've seen at Rainbow. I have two highlights I want to share, and I'm going to ask Jesse to share a highlight of what they've seen Rainbow doing. And my highlight is that we offered last year the very first ever summer camp for LGBTQ youth called Camp Fierce, Freedom of Identity Expression through Rainbow Empowerment is what that stands for. And it was amazing. We were able to serve over 45 youth at the camp. We had a leadership program for teens. And we've made an impact in the community. It was a life-saving and life-affirming opportunity, and we just experienced so much joy. serving the kids at the camp. And we're doing it again. So you can look forward to seeing that pop up in the community. And my second thing that I'm super proud of is every time I have the chance, I want to make sure people understand that we have resources for houseless LGBTQ youth. This is a very important thing that Rainbow offers. It is a disparity that is disproportionately experienced by LGBTQ youth due to family rejection in their lives. And so we see this happening in our county. We see this happening all over our country, where LGBTQ youth are almost over 127% more likely to become houseless than their non-LGBTQ peers. And so I'm really proud that we are making a difference in this, that we're working towards supporting young people in this situation. So I want to pass it to Jesse to share something that he thinks is a highlight that Rainbow does.
See, I thought I had my answer, and then you mentioned the summer camp, and I feel like that completely is going to change my answer. But I do want to highlight how fun and special I feel like the summer camp was, and to be able to be a part of that, and to be able to lead a workshop and a little activity with the youth. But I think I'm also going to highlight just the clinical services, just because I feel like I am biased because I was a clinical intern with Rainbow. But being able to see the power that having a queer/trans therapist can have for specifically the trans and non-binary youth that I was working with, and being able to like see themselves become more confident and sure of themselves in their gender identity and sexuality was very powerful. And I don't take that lightly. And I really think that Rainbow provides a space for healing and realization, and just so many, I guess, coming to terms with oneself, which I think is beautiful and needed for our youth. So yeah, I think I'm gonna choose that to highlight as well.
Thanks, Jesse. I appreciate it. So many good things we're doing over there, and I'm so glad that we've been a part of some of them together. So that's been really exciting. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into a little bit of our content for today, but I wanted to let you know that we'll be following up with you where you'll have a link to all of our slides. We also have like a resource deck that we like to share with folks so that you can easily access resources. So we'll be sending that out through our contacts at Acalanes, and making sure that you all have access to it. We want to encourage you to ask questions today and use the chat function. We will try to be as responsive as possible just going through. And I think it's nice to be able to ask a question in real time. So if you have something come up, just throw it in the chat. We'll see it. We'll try to address it. We're really here for you, and we want this to be meaningful for you. So yes, we've brought slides and content, but you're really our content. So if you want to reach out to us and ask some questions, we have a lot that we can share. So we will stop our presentation like around 6:45 for Q&A, just to make sure we have time for folks. Oh, and you can also just put like things you love about what we're saying in the Q&A, because we love affirmations. If you hear something you like, let us know. All right, so we have another poll. We're going to be doing some of these throughout. And the second poll is really a question for you to think about your comfort level. And so the question is, what is your comfort level with discussing topics around sexual orientation and gender identity with your family? So thinking about the home that you live in and the people that you consider your family, like how comfortable are you? Are you very comfortable? Are you somewhat comfortable? Are you not very comfortable? And again, this is just to help Jesse and I understand who's in our space today. Woo, look at y'all. All right, we have people who are very comfortable and somewhat comfortable, and nobody is not very comfortable. This is amazing. So I'm glad to hear that you're all really comfortable. We'll try to make sure we have a really robust Q&A for you all in case you have very specific things you would like for us to share. So that's helpful to know. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us into our next part. So one of the things that we name all of our trainings around and all of our work is SOGI. And SOGI stands for Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and Expression. And I want to share this resource with you all. This is the SOGI Handbook. It was written by Kiku Johnson, who is the former ED of Rainbow. He is also an out trans man of color. And when he wrote this handbook to really be a resource for folks like yourself, for families, for people in community leading programs, for teachers, for anyone who wanted to be a stronger ally for LGBTQ youth and really learn more about how intersectionality and other aspects of identity are impacting the experience of our LGBTQ youth. So this is an open, free resource. It is in Spanish and English, and it was funded by the Center of Disease Control and supported by the New York State Department of Health and Cornell. And so this is a great resource. It's free. Whenever you do a training with Rainbow, we drop a bunch off at your school site. We can get you some copies that are printed if you'd ever like to hand them out to folks. Just want to spread the love and the joy and the richness of this resource. It also has a really strong glossary in there of terms that can be very helpful. I will say that the SOGI handbook is not intended for a youth read. I think that this is really like an adult read. I think we'll share other resources that I think are a little stronger for young people to be able to be more approachable for them. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Jesse to do a little bit around some definitions.
Thank you, Laura. So I think an important part of the SOGI handbook is that, or a good thing that it does, I feel, is that it distangles SOGI from just being an LGBT issue. And I think it extends it to everyone because what SOGI stands for is sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And if you really think about it, we all have a sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. I feel like it's usually more associated and it's more heard of for LGBT folks, maybe because we move away from the norm of what is quote unquote traditional for these different components of SOGI. So I think it's important to break down what SOGI is. So the SO stands for sexual orientation, which I'm sure most people know that it's a person's physical, romantic, emotional, aesthetic, and or other form of attraction to others. So gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same, and really wanting to highlight this both in this training and then for y'all in your understanding of SOGI and as well as your advocacy and activism as well. So think of sexual orientation as who you love or are attracted to. And then we have gender identity, which refers to the individual identification of a person's gender as defined by that person and can differ from their sex assigned at birth. It is one's internal sense of being a man or woman, neither of these, both, or other genders. So you could think of gender identity as the deeply held sense of who you are. And then lastly, gender expression refers to the way one expresses their gender identity. It is the physical manifestation of one's gender identity through clothing, hairstyle, voice, body shape, etc. And this is how you communicate your gender to the world. And again, we all have a SOGI. Next slide. And then just want to talk about some common umbrella terms that are used within the community, within the LGBTQIA+ community specifically. So you'll often hear the word queer, which is an umbrella term for the community referring to an individual's sexual orientation and or gender identity. It is an identifier for all non-heterosexual and non-cisgender identities. Just a quick note, not everyone is comfortable with the term queer. I feel like it has been used historically as a derogatory term, but like most terms that have been used historically for derogatory purposes, there has been a switch to reclaim that term. So I feel like it's mostly used with like the younger generation. Yeah, just want to make sure we mention that. And then transgender is another umbrella term, which refers to an individual whose gender identity does not correspond with their sex assigned at birth. And this encompasses a lot of different things like non-binary, genderqueer, et cetera. But transgender is typically what's used as the broader term. And then cisgender refers to an individual whose gender identity corresponds with the sex assigned at birth. So most likely, if you don't fall under the transgender umbrella, then you're most likely cisgender. Next slide. Cool. So I think especially with this group, seeing that y'all feel very familiar with these concepts, and also with like speaking about LGBT maybe topics within your home, I think you can never shy away from like asking these specific questions about what does that mean to you. As we just mentioned in the previous slides, it gets pretty confusing knowing what people mean with certain terms. So I don't think you could ever go wrong with just asking what that means to you. As we saw, like for example, queer could refer to sexual orientation or gender identity. So just wanting to get a better idea of what that means for individuals. And then also, what does that look like for you? So what does being queer like mean to you? What does that do for you? How does that make you feel, et cetera, I think are really important things that you could ask not only members of your family, but maybe other people that you interface with as well. Next slide. And I'm going to pass it back to Laura.
Yeah, and I see that we had a question come in that I think we can address before we move into the next part. And the question is, how do you feel about the statement born in the wrong body? And so I appreciate somebody putting that in the chat. What I would say is, I feel like that's every person's determination to know if that's how they feel. I think very similarly, I mean, I'm a cisgender person, and I have not felt that before. I'm somebody who has not felt like I was in the wrong body. I think that's a very real experience for some people, where they really truly feel like they are in the wrong body. They are not in a body that is aligned with how they would feel like they can be their most authentic self. And so I think with a lot of things, also some statements like that could really trigger a lot of feelings for people, right? Like it gets kind of brings up a lot. So whenever we talk about the body, I think it's really important to just be really sensitive to those topics and like really listen to what someone is telling you. If someone says to me, they feel like they were born in the wrong body, I believe them. But I don't necessarily challenge the use of that language or anything like that. I think it really is dependent on the person. I think some people have a journey that's more linear, and also some people have a journey that is less linear. And it's less about sort of how they were born and who they are now. And it actually is more fluid than even that. Jesse, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I really appreciate the question. I think that's a very important and valid question. I think, as Laura was touching on, I think it depends really on the individual. For some people, they feel like, I feel like the experience is different for a lot of different people. I think where it becomes potentially a problem, I will say, is when you push that narrative onto everyone. So basically, I think it's a case-by-case scenario. It's interesting that this question was asked because on my nightstand, I have a book called The Myth of the Wrong Body, which I haven't started reading yet, but it's there for a reason. And I could provide more information if folks are interested, but there is like a book, and I think, again, I think that when you push that narrative onto every trans individual, and that's how you think that's how everyone sees themselves, and I think that it can become problematic. Because I know some people feel very powerful and feel very content with the different stages that they have to go through in their life, and coming to the realization that they're trans, and like embracing maybe the different parts of who they are. And that I think we'll touch on in this next component of the discussion. But yeah, thank you so much for the question.
Great. All right, so this next slide you see here is our lovely gender unicorn, and I wanted to share this as a resource. with folks and to be able to have conversations. I know we have folks here with young children, we have folks here with high school kids. And I wanted to make sure there was something that would really be a way to talk about really your whole SOGI at any given time. I taught sex ed for 10 years, and I also taught gender studies with middle schoolers. And we would use tools like this on an ongoing basis just to have conversations, just to be able to share around our identities, how much we feel a certain way on that given day, which could change. And just giving them opportunities. The other reason I like this resource, it was created by trans students. So it's from the TSER organization, and they have a lot of resources there and free posters. I believe this also comes in 14 languages, which I think is a pretty powerful thing. So like all tools, it's not perfect, but it is a tool that can be used for conversation. And as Jesse and I talk, we'll use it a little bit, but it won't be a direct link to what we're about to share, but just to be able to give you some context from other queer people around their experience. We're each going to share a little bit about our gender journey and identity to kind of give you a sense of how you could use this tool, but also just to learn about our experiences, and hopefully it can be useful for you. So for me, my sex assigned at birth was female, and I felt really strong in my female girl identity growing up. I always felt like a girl. I never questioned it. I also was brought up in a really binary neighborhood that was really strongly heterosexual, very family oriented. I didn't see a whole lot of folks that were LGBTQ when I was growing up. Those who were sort of not highly respected in my community, and questioned and sort of suspect. And it was definitely something that influenced me growing up. I think I was very concerned because I was a sporty kid. I was kind of a tomboy. I loved sports. I still love sports. And I worked really hard to make sure that I still seemed feminine while playing sports because I was so worried about being interpreted as masculine or not feminine. That was a priority for me as a kid. I was like, I got to make sure that people don't think I'm gay or don't think that I'm this. And at that time, I hadn't even thought about it myself. I just assumed I was straight. I assumed I would get married to a man and have kids and do all the things that my community was showing me as a kid were the pathways to take. So my community had a really big influence on my own identity exploration in the sense that it really showed me a path and didn't show me other paths or ask me other questions. My gender expression, as I mentioned as a kid, was kind of tomboyish, kind of masculine in a certain way, but I worked so hard to counter that with femininity. So it was definitely something I grappled with as a young person. I definitely figured out in college that I was attracted to women, and it was a very exciting time in my life. I loved just being able to think about my life differently. I felt so much more at home in my relationships. I felt just so much more validated, but it was very scary for me to consider coming out. Even though I had a supportive family, even though my family, I never thought they'd stop loving me. It was very scary to think about the rejection, the disappointment they might feel, and all of the things that I carried with me for years before coming out. Now, all of this is just to share that really, like, my story was pretty consistent in the sense that I lived for a certain point of my life, just assuming I was a straight girl. And then I moved on and I started thinking, okay, now I must be a lesbian because I like women. There weren't a lot of terms when I was coming out to be able to be much of anything else. But currently and in my life throughout my exploration as I taught sex ed, I really started to evaluate like what do things mean for me? I even started to think about what does gender mean to me? Like, am I really, a girl? Like I started actually asking myself those questions because I was like, wow, like I've never even asked myself what I really feel about my gender. I never gave myself that permission. I never gave, no one gave me that permission. And so a tool like this, I think, is really permission giving. It's like, oh, how do you feel about your gender identity? Do you feel feminine? Do you feel masculine? Do you feel other? Like, how are you feeling about that? And just the ability to ask yourself that question can give you so much power, as it did for me around my sexuality. My sexuality, being able to ask myself questions gave me so much power. And as I taught sex ed and really learned from my students all the new words, I was like, this is amazing. I'm going to try some of these words. And I started thinking about it like, am I pansexual? Is that the word that I am? Am I queer? Is that the word that I am? And just what a gift it was for me to be around young people. Our young people are leading the way. They're coming up with all the new words. They are living gender like a universe. They are not in the construct that I was raised in anymore. And I'm so proud of our young people and how they are redefining what things mean and that things don't have to be fixed. Things can move, things can change, things can be fluid. You can have one identity for a while and then you can decide or feel differently about that identity later, and that's okay. And I think we can learn a lot from our young people when it comes to also what does it mean to be trans or what does it mean to be non-binary. It means something different to so many people that we really need to listen and try to see where people are coming from and honor where they're at in the moment. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my journey and how like community and my family impacted me. I will say that when I first came out, I was met with a lot of microaggressions. And microaggressions are those like small slights, sometimes not so small, that kind of rub up against you and create harm. I just think we're going to talk a little bit about how families can support our young people. And some of that is going to be to avoid some of those microaggressions, those statements that get said that are just like, ouch, that really hurt. So I think one of the things we want to really work on with our families is how do we avoid these unintentional microaggressions? How do we do our own work away from our children and lead with the love and then figure out the things we're confused about in other safe spaces so we don't harm our kids. So I'm going to pass it over to Jessie to tell us a little bit about her journey and her community and her.
Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing. So when I was born, the doctor, the sex sign at birth to me was male. And I feel for growing up in a traditional Mexican family, and in a neighborhood and city that's very strongly Latinx, Latina like influenced. I grew up with the expression, with the identity, with the expectations that I was male. I don't think I really had any issues or like realizations that I didn't necessarily enjoy that so much until I was maybe old enough to start doing chores. So then I started noticing like the differences between boys and girls. And I just didn't understand like why certain expectations were met for me. And I feel like they're being imposed on me rather than me like selecting them or me feeling like they fit who I was. Also growing up, LGBT issues weren't really talked about in my home. I remember like certain like shows or TVs would show LGBT people in like a very unfavorable light, and also like as a point of like ridicule and like mockery. So as you can imagine, growing up with like seeing like my parents like laugh like during those like segments on TV, you can imagine how like that becomes like ingrained that like, okay, whatever I'm feeling, it's definitely not okay. And like, you don't want to be laughed at, or you don't want to be a joke. So as I grew older, maybe into like my middle school and teenage years, I um, came out as gay at the time. I was still figuring stuff out for myself. I remember I didn't really feel like safe to disclose at home, but I remember the close-knit group of friends that I had in high school. And I feel like there was like little trinklets of like me like dropping hints that I was trans, but I feel like I didn't know even what that meant, or like had like the words to like manifest it. I just remember telling friends, like using like thinking about it back now, like I think about like okay, those are definitely signs that I was trying to communicate that I was trans. But at the time I just didn't have the words. I just remember telling my friends I wish like people could see me for how I saw myself on the inside, and using words like that. And then when I left to college, when I was about 17, 18, it was my first time being away from home and like a large distance from home. I was about like 300, 400 miles away from home. So I was able to really think about who I was and like what terms best fit for me, and just think about myself in relation to other people. So at that time, I knew that I was trans, and I somehow found the courage to share it with other people. So around the age of like 18, 19, I shared with like some really close friends, and they're super supportive. And then I shared with my family, and unfortunately they didn't have the best response. And when we talk about like microaggressions, I feel like the things that were happening when I first came out to them were definitely signs of microaggressions. And I would even go a little bit further than that, very unsupportive. So I went back into the closet for about 3 more years. I tried to deny that I was trans, and I was trying to embrace being a boy and being masculine. And to be honest, I felt very miserable, and I feel like I was depressed, and a lot of other mental health issues for sure. And then I came across this one class that I think truly saved my life when I was at UCLA. And I just learned about gender systems and gender identities across the world. And I think just seeing how normal and how normal throughout different points of human history that, I guess like gender diversity exists in different cultures and different parts of the world throughout different times. That was very moving and impactful for me, to not feel like there was something wrong with me. So when I came out again, I think I was like 21 at this point, 2021, I came out again. And this time, like, it wasn't more so like testing the waters. It was more so like, this is who I am, and like, you could either support me, or like, I built a strong enough support system where I feel like I can make it on my own. Fortunately, my family was actually surprisingly very supportive. And that's not to say that there weren't hiccups along the way, but I think it's definitely been leaps and bounds of a difference from the first time I came out, and just seeing where we are like now in this specific point in my life. And then as I continue to I've been like out and have been transitioning for about 5 going on 6 years now, and just like seeing how like my expression has changed, the way I think about myself has changed, just like how confident I am as a person. And also just yeah, I think just physical, like just thinking of like that journey from considering myself as gay to being now, like I would say more so on like the pansexual side of being a trans woman, and just thinking about the different support systems and how important it would have been for me, I think, growing up, to have like a different like sense of like support. And I feel like if my parents knew that they would have a child that was trans or even had those resources growing up, I think they would definitely have made different choices about like how they responded to LGBT things. But all this to say that that's my journey, and there are things that could have been different, but I think, I mean, it made me the person I am today. So can't change the past. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Laura.
Thanks, Jessie. I feel really honored to be in space with you. So thanks for sharing your story and being your authentic you. I really appreciate you. I think something that I want to address that's come up in the chat is kind of just to mention too, because we do have different folks in the room with different comfort levels, and we're starting to get quite a few questions around hormones and topics around medical transition. And so I think a couple clarifications that I want to make. First of all, is that me and Jessie are not medical doctors. We're not going to give medical advice, but what we can share is, not everybody chooses to transition medically, even when they're trans, so that you can have social transition, which is going to be like changing your name, changing your pronouns, maybe, maybe changing your expression. And then you could also have medical transition. You can also have like a legal transition where you like go through paperwork and change your name. And I get the sense that there's some folks in the audience that are dealing with some of these things. And so I wanted to just honor that. One in particular is asking about how to have a conversation with their teen about what to expect about getting on hormones and how to support them. And this is a really great question. And I want to acknowledge that the fact that you're even asking that question shows me a lot about what kind of parent you are, because you're not, you're asking how to facilitate the conversation. And I think, possibly I'm just going to make a few suggestions. One is if you haven't, and if your child hasn't read the book Beyond Magenta, I think that's a really great book that shows a lot of different stories of trans and non-binary youth and kind of how they've gone through different things. And so I think having a tool and then talking about it and then being able to ask, like, how are you feeling and what's coming up for you, I think would be a really great way. I also think it's hard to know what someone is going to go through on a hormone. It's a very powerful thing to go through. I am a partner of a trans individual who's gone through medical transition and used hormones. And it still is something that we're always navigating of how does it feel and what's going on and where are you at with it? I think there's a lot, it's very complicated. And so even to think about what to expect, I'm not sure we know what to expect all the time. We have the things that the doctors will tell you, like, oh, at this amount of time, you might start experiencing this, or you might start experiencing this. But there's a lot of unknown of how things will feel. So I want to commend you for wanting to have the conversation. And I think thinking of creative ways to keep the door open, to be having ongoing, to have touch points. Whether or not they're using the hormones yet or not. Just like, how are you feeling about that? What have you learned? What have you watched? I'd be curious what they were seeking out on their own as resources. Because I know that's something that happens a lot too with our young people is they'll go seeking on their own resources for what happens. And so I think getting in the know of what they are currently looking at, what they're reading, what they're watching on YouTube, just that's something that I think would be really important to me as a parent of an LGBTQ youth is finding out what they're seeing and talking to them about how they're feeling. Yeah. Jessie, anything you want to add around that topic?
I think I'll just add on like the power and importance of like maybe researching on your own and being able to like think about the changes that they can expect. Of course, everyone's different, so there's no way that you're ever going to like get it right necessarily. But I think if you have an idea, I think that can definitely help facilitate a conversation. You could be like this, like you can ask your teen what you know. Or what they know, and they could share, and you could share the stuff that you research yourself to let them know that you're actually like taking an active role and also researching what to expect. And I think what Laura's also like mentioning, just like checking in at different stages, say that like hormones, like your child starts hormones sometime in the near future, always checking in with them at different like points to see like, how does it feel? Are things going as you imagined? Can things go differently? Like just always wanting to assess the situation. I think you can never go wrong with that. And also, I'm a big proponent of like having a therapist. I'm not sure if like you feel comfortable having a therapist with your child, or even like families therapy. I think that could be very powerful. But those are just my suggestions.
All right, I'm going to move us along, and if we see some more questions in the chat that we can share, we will. I'm going to go ahead and move us to another poll, and we're just going to ask you to reflect. We're going to put it in your hands right now. I was sharing with you how really I was never asked how I felt about my gender and my sexuality. So we're just going to ask you, like, how do you identify? It's anonymous. Let's see who we have in the room. Do we have people who are straight or heterosexual? Do we have anyone who identifies as gay or lesbian, maybe bisexual, pansexual, or other? To get a sense of who we are in the space. And just to give everybody a little bit of comfort, if you're somebody who's like, there are so many words, I don't even know where to start, I can't keep up with anything. There are like over 500 words in the LGBTQ umbrella. I find that inspiring because many of these terms and words have come from our young people exploring themselves. Great. So yeah, we have some folks who are identified as straight, about half of us, and then we have bisexual or other. I wish we could list more of the 500 words because we don't want to just be like, oh, all these other over here. It's important. However you identify, even if you identify as asexual, or meaning, no sexual attraction or romantic attraction, depending on how you identify asexuality for yourself. So thank you all for answering that. We're going to do the next one as well, which is around gender identity, just to give people a chance to think for themselves. How do they identify their gender? So Lene, I think we got another one. Yeah, so what is your gender identity? Right, so we do have some, over half of us are cisgender in the space, and we do have some folks who are non-binary or other. So I appreciate you all for taking a moment to think about yourself and answer that, and hopefully starting to get more comfortable. I know people were saying they feel comfortable in their homes talking, but I think it's also important to talk about ourselves and who we are to get a better understanding of how to have conversations in our homes. So thank you all for that. You can go ahead and close that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share a little bit of data. I'm not going to spend too much time here because I think we have some folks in the know, and I just want to be respectful of who we have here in the space and getting to some of these great questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So I'm going to go to the next screen. So I'm doing too many things. Yeah, so I want to make sure everyone's aware of the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is an amazing organization that's national, and every year they do a survey on our LGBTQ youth. And I think it's really important, even though it's a little scary and very hard sometimes to look at what's real, it's really important for us to know that a lot of our LGBTQ youth are in crisis or are experiencing mental health challenges, and that there is a lot that we can do to change that. So I want to make sure that we know the why, but also what we can do. And so in the most recent survey that came out in 2022, they learned that 45% of the LGBTQ respondents seriously considered attempting suicide, and over half of the trans and non-binary youth had considered suicide. And so we know that our trans and non-binary youth are in a really high risk category. And what that means isn't necessarily to be afraid of them being trans or non-binary, it's to learn about what the supports are that they uniquely need so that we can provide it. We also learned that 60% of LGBTQ youth wanted mental health services, but were not able to get it. And 71% of transgender and non-binary youth reported they'd experienced discrimination based on their gender identity. And we see this a lot, this non-affirming spaces for kids who are non-binary and trans. And so what I want to focus on is after this last one is just to know that our young people are bombarded with messages. And even though there are some changes that have been really positive, we have more representation, we have more rights, we have more visibility. These negative messages are still really present. And so as much as we have this positive thing, we're also knowing that our LGBTQ youth are experiencing daily, sometimes daily, even more than a few times a day. I recently did a workshop with some of the teens in your school district, and I asked them, how often are you hearing slurs? And they were saying things like daily, they're hearing slurs. Daily, they're hearing things that are not affirming their identity. So I think it's really important to know that we have a long way to go, but there are some things we can really do. And so this is in the data, so we know that it stands, and we know that transgender and non-binary youth who have their chosen name and pronouns respected by most of the people in their life, it decreases attempted suicide by half. So it cuts it in half just by having that being something that happens. And sometimes people will ask me in trainings, well, does that mean that I have to get it right every time, or I'm harming them? It doesn't mean that you have to get it right every time. It doesn't mean that making one mistake is going to cause your child to have a really severe mental health crisis. What it does mean is that we have to find a way, as cisgender folks in particular, to make mistakes in a way that's affirming the other person and not focusing on us and belaboring something and putting more burden on somebody else. So what we need to focus on is that use of pronouns in a way that if I make a mistake, I make mistakes, everyone makes mistakes, but we can do it in a way where it's not about us and it's about affirming someone else and finding out what they need. We also know that LGBTQ youth who have spaces that affirm them, they have lower rates of suicide. So your GSAs, your sagas at your school, any of the groups that are affirming, these are, and going to Rainbow Community Center, coming to Camp Fierce, all of these things are suicide prevention. And we really know how important this is. So this is something we're focused on a lot at Rainbow, is making sure every school has some kind of affirming club, that every LGBTQ youth knows how to access Rainbow, that they have a Trevor Project hotline, that we have all these different resources. We also know that LGBTQ youth that have one supportive adult report lower rates of suicide. I get the real sense that people on this call are some of those people in the lives of their young people already, but we can't stress enough how important it is, even if your child is not out as LGBTQ, that there are practices you can do as a parent that will keep them safe, make things safer for them and more possible if they ever do come out, if they have friends that come out, any of those things are in their life. So I'm going to pass it to Jesse to talk a little bit about pronouns. We'll also get to some of the questions in the chat. And if you have questions about pronouns, this is a good time to put them in there. And we're going to talk a little bit about non-gendered language and how powerful it is as well. Take it away, Jesse.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, so some of the pronouns I see listed here probably some of the more common ones. So she, her, he, him, they, them. And just a fun fact, the they, them pronoun has been used in the singular tense, and that dates back to the 1300s. Additionally, the dictionary officially added an additional definition of the they pronoun. So as you know, as our understanding of gender and self evolves, so do social indications of that as well. And then note just that not all people who are non-binary use they, them pronouns, and not all people who use they, them pronouns are non-binary. So it really goes back to that question that we asked earlier about like asking what that means for you, or how does that feel like for you? I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide for the sake of time. And of course, you know, pronouns, especially when people maybe add or change their pronouns, or maybe especially as a parent, you know, maybe you've been so accustomed to refer to someone as a specific pronoun, but as long as you're trying, and you know that we all make mistakes, it's important to affirm the other person when mistakes are made, to be kind to yourself. We're all human, even LGBT people make mistakes. Keep practicing and be really committed to learning to reduce the amount of mistakes that LGBT folks have to necessarily hear and endure. Yeah, next slide. And then another thing that I think is important, that is, I feel like almost seen as invisible, is just how gendered our language is. So we wanted to touch on using non-gendered language. So if you really think about maybe the specific words and speech patterns that you have, maybe you'll notice that ladies, gentlemen, ma'am, sir, girls, guys is often used. So maybe not even really thinking about what they imply or what you're saying when you're speaking to a specific group. So consider using instead, thanks friends, have a great night, good morning folks, hi everyone, and for you, and can I get you all something? So again, wanting to switch from very gendered language to more gender inclusive, non-gendered language. And this matters. Using gender inclusive language respects and acknowledges the gender identities of all people and removes assumptions, so be mindful of language. Cool.
I know we're going to go to some Q&A and get to this because I know we have a hard end, but we could be with you all night. I have these 2 slides that I want to just share with you all. I'm not going to go through them all, but this is a resource that we'll share with you. And we want to make sure that you can see it, because sometimes we don't realize the thing that we're doing could be harming somebody. And so I wanted to make sure you have these from our resource we'll share with you at the end. These are just things that could be happening and just kind of doing a check, like, is this happening in my family? Is this happening in my home? And then the next slide after that, which you'll also have access to, are behaviors that help. And thinking about, does this happen in my home? And this is where we really want folks to focus, right? We want you to focus on what helps to make sure that we're doing justice for our children. And this is for all children, right? So when we create these safe spaces, it's for everybody, not just our LGBTQ youth, although they have the highest impact for being helped through this. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll kind of close with a poll and then answer a question here in the chat. So we want everybody thinking about some action before they leave and thinking about something that they can do in the next week if they haven't done it before. And while we are getting those responses, I do want to answer a question around how to support exploration for younger kids, where there's some concerns that young teens are more confused by trying to figure out how they feel about themselves sexually. And I definitely can answer this from a sex ed perspective. From 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, they're absolutely confused about trying to find out about themselves sexually. And they actually, from my experience with working with that age group, very empowered by the words, where like sometimes I would think, oh, it must be so overwhelming to think, am I this, am I this, am I that? And they would be like, no, it feels good because I can try it on, or I can think about it, or like maybe I am. And I think, developing your sexuality is almost always confusing for young people, no matter who they are, and something that takes time. And just being open and providing resources and stories and examples can help people see themselves in other stories. And I think that's really helpful for young people. And Jesse, if you're seeing anything in here, I'm seeing what people are going to do, which is exciting. Got some action coming from this.
Yeah, I see some questions.
Mhm.
Do you want to touch on resources first, then we can
Nope, just when you want to come back to this and you'll be able to see some resources we talked about today. But specifically the family project is where those posters are with the affirming actions.
I do see some questions regarding just
So like, I want to thank everybody for coming, and you will have access to what Laura and Jesse have shared with you all. And I know that there are a few questions still. I will get those to both of them and they can be able to respond.
Perfect.
Most of you, I have your email, and this webinar will be posted on our website within the next couple days. So, and if you have any specific questions and I don't have your email, you can always send them to me and I will connect you with Laura and Jesse. Unless, is that fine with the both of you?
Totally. Yeah, just share the questions and we'll
They're
totally
really good
respond.
questions.
They're great questions. I wish we had a whole nother like 3 hours with y'all to answer your questions, but please do send it. We'll send them answers, and hopefully that can be shared with folks as well.
All right. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.